Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. In recent weeks, Canadians have had their trust shaken in the government's plan on vaccines. Promised vaccine rollouts have been drastically cut to only 15% of what Prime Minister Trudeau promised just weeks ago. Then a big announcement about domestic manufacturing capacity turned out to be too little, too late. Canada likely won't be producing vaccines here at home until 2022. Now we are learning that Moderna's scheduled shipments for later this month are also up in the air. Much of this uncertainty is due to the failure to plan by the Liberal government. Les Canadiens veulent croire le Premier ministre, mais il ne livre pas la marchandise. On se fait promettre un plan pour les vaccins, mais on va juste recevoir 15% de ce que M. Trudeau a annoncé. Pour sauver l'affaire, ce gouvernement investit dans la production de vaccins ici, mais ils vont être prêts en 2022. Et maintenant, on apprend que l'arrivée des vaccins Moderna est peut-être interrompue. Ce gouvernement fait de nouvelles annonces pour cacher les erreurs libérales. Et les Canadiens payent le prix. Let's be clear. Delays in vaccines means delays in reopening and rebuilding our economy. Vaccine protectionism should have surprised no one. Last April, Minister Freeland was calling PPE procurement worldwide the Wild West. Airplanes full of masks and ventilators were being redirected off tarmacs to the highest bidder. It's incredible to think that the Liberal government didn't learn from that experience and didn't plan to ensure that Canada would not end up empty-handed when it came to vaccines. But here we are. The naive belief by Mr. Trudeau that other countries would help us out instead of putting their own citizens first in a crisis is why we are here today. But what is done, and we must begin to plan to secure our economic future. Au début de la pandémie, d'autres pays nous ont fait compétition pour un accès à des masques. Maintenant, c'est une lutte mondiale pour les vaccins et M. Trudeau ne voit pas cela. Le Canada a besoin d'un gouvernement capable de répondre rapidement aux besoins des Canadiens, surtout dans une période de crise. Et il faut un plan clair et précis pour que les Canadiens retrouvent leur job. C'est la mission du Parti conservateur. Canadians need to get back to work. We need a plan to create jobs in every sector and in every region of the country. Canada cannot afford another failure to plan. Budgets don't balance themselves, vaccines won't deliver themselves, and our economy will not rebuild itself. The time to secure our future is now. Today, Canada's Conservatives are introducing a motion to create a special committee on one of the most important pillars of our recovery, the economic relationship between Canada and the United States. Trade between Canada and the U.S. exceeds $1.5 billion per day. But by American procurement rules and an absence of government advocacy for North American energy security puts all of that in jeopardy. Prime Minister Trudeau has had projects canceled by the U.S. multiple times. After 5 years, we have no softwood lumber agreement. And the Liberals have let down unionized workers in the steel, aluminum, and auto sectors. Les États-Unis sont notre plus proche ami et allié. Nous devons travailler ensemble. La motion que nous déposons aujourd'hui va envoyer un signal clair. Nous allons créer un comité spécial pour assurer cette coopération. Il faut travailler ensemble pour qu'une Amérique du Nord prospère. At a time when both of our countries need to be focused on getting people back to work and ensuring our way of life pre-COVID returns, this committee will get answers for Canadians and the thousands of families worried about their future. We must work together to get our economy back on track. We must start now to secure our future. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Nous allons maintenant passer aux questions, en commençant par les questions au téléphone. Un rappel, une question suivie par journaliste. We'll now take questions, starting with questions on the phone. Quick reminder, one question, one follow-up per reporter. Operator, do we have a first question?
Yes, thank you, merci. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur l'étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. Et la première question est de Lina Dib, la presse canadienne. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour, M. O'Toole. Je voudrais savoir votre opinion sur la question des vaccins qu'on obtiendra via COVAX. Il y a tout un débat éthique autour de ça. Vous vous placez où?
Malheureusement, on n'a pas un plan pour les vaccins chez nous, pour fabriquer chez nous, et on va recevoir les vaccins pour les autres pays, les pays pauvres. Nous sommes un pays riche, un pays de G7, et on doit avoir la capacité chez nous pour les vaccins, pas sur un programme pour les pays pauvres. Mais c'est un autre exemple d'une absence d'un plan clair par le gouvernement Trudeau.
Donc, est-ce que vous êtes en train de dire qu'on ne devrait pas accepter ces vaccins-là, qu'on devrait les laisser aller à des pays en développement, quitte à avoir 1 à 3 millions de doses de moins que...
On a besoin des vaccins immédiatement pour une relance économique, bien sûr. Mais malheureusement, avec une approche lente par le gouvernement Trudeau pour le vaccin, on n'a pas des doses. La semaine passée, 0 dose par Pfizer. Pas beaucoup de doses par Moderna cette mois. Malheureusement, on n'a pas un plan et c'est pourquoi le gouvernement va trouver des vaccins de COVAX, les vaccins pour les pays pauvres. C'est un exemple d'un gouvernement en crise. In English, the COVAX vaccines were a way the developed countries like Canada were helping poorer countries have access to vaccines. The very fact that Canada is the only G7 country asking the COVAX consortium for vaccines is demonstration that we have no plan. And Canadians need vaccines to get the country working, to secure our future. And yet this is another indication that the Trudeau government has no plan.
Operator, next question.
Thank you, merci. The next question. La prochaine question est de Raymond Filion, TVA. À vous la parole.
Merci. Bonjour, M. O'Toole. Vous dites que le recours à COVAX, c'est l'exemple d'un gouvernement en crise. Mais vous, si vous étiez premier ministre aujourd'hui, dans la situation actuelle, est-ce que vous accepteriez ces doses ou pas?
On a besoin des doses immédiatement. Comme j'ai dit, pour la relance économique, pour le bien-être des Canadiens, on a besoin des tests de dépistage rapides, des vaccins et d'informations pour les Canadiens en pleine d'une crise. Mais la situation avec COVAX, c'est un autre exemple d'un gouvernement sans un plan pour les vaccins. Beaucoup de contrats, beaucoup de bonnes paroles, mais pas de doses chaque semaine. This is another example of a government without a plan. No doses, lots of great words, lots of talk about contracts and doses in 2023, but not enough now for our economic rebuilding, for securing our future, and that's what Canadians want.
Le calendrier de M. Trudeau, il le maintient, là, 6 millions de doses d'ici la fin mars, tout le monde vacciné d'ici septembre. Dans la situation actuelle, y croyez-vous, vous?
Les Canadiens méritent la vérité. Et après seulement quelques semaines, on n'a pas reçu des vaccins que M. Trudeau a promis il y a 4 semaines. Il n'y a pas un plan. Il n'y a pas de transparence avec les contrats. Et c'est pourquoi nous sommes en train de demander l'information par le gouvernement, les contrats. On a besoin des vaccins pour la relance économique, pour le bien-être des Canadiennes et Canadiennes à travers le pays. C'est difficile en plein d'une crise d'avoir une situation comme ça.
Opérateur, prochaine question.
Merci, thank you. The next question is from Andrew Lawton of True North. The line is open. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. The Heritage Minister has said that the government will imminently be introducing legislation to tackle what it says is online hate, and Minister Guilbeault has said that the definition will be based on the Watcott Supreme Court decision, which was one that had focused more on harm than free speech, and had actually at one point had said that something could be truthful but still qualify as hate speech. And I'm curious, for you as the leader of a party that repealed Section 13 of the Human Rights Act and someone who stood up for free speech in the leadership, what your thoughts are on this forthcoming legislation.
I've stood up for free speech in this parliamentary session when the Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau, suggested it wasn't a priority when it's a fundamental pillar. We saw President Macron call Prime Minister Legault, or Premier Legault, before he called Prime Minister Trudeau. This week, Andrew, we've actually been focused on the MindGeek Pornhub situation, where we have to protect our most vulnerable online. Some of the testimony we've heard is literally heartbreaking. And the fact that a company that was originated in Canada and had that presence, the fact that we're not shutting down these ability for the vulnerable to be exploited online is a travesty. So we'll see what the government brings forward, but we want to make sure that the most vulnerable with online exploitation is an immediate priority.
Turning to the West, Keystone is canceled, Line 5 is at risk, Western alienation continues to grow without any real plan from this government, and now we have an Alberta MLA that's calling for an independence referendum as soon as the next election. A lot of the people that are favoring Alberta independence are people that seem to be on the right side of the political spectrum, part of the conservative movement. What do you feel is your role in fighting against Western alienation?
It's the first thing I brought up to the Prime Minister in my first call with him. Canadians are losing faith because of the incompetence, the ethical scandals, and the ideological out-of-touch approach of the Trudeau government. This is why, Andrew, we're having the committee that we're requesting today, the Canada-US Committee. After 5 years, no softwood lumber agreement. Prime Minister Trudeau has had Keystone canceled twice under two different presidents. Line 5 is at risk. By American protectionism, we can't have vaccine and PPE sharing with our closest ally. We need to make sure that we rebalance trade with the United States for the well-being of tens of thousands of Canadian families in energy and forestry, in the auto industry, in my own backyard, in my own riding. Conservatives are bringing this committee forward today to focus on securing that important economic partnership so that thousands of families will have the certainty of a job.
And we'll now take questions in the room. Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions dans la salle. Mackenzie?
Mr. O'Toole, Mackenzie Gray with CTV News. You didn't answer the question earlier on whether or not, if you were Prime Minister, you would take the COVAX vaccines. Can you give us a response to that, please?
The fact, Mackenzie, that we're taking vaccines from a multi-country fund that was intended to help poorer countries is an example of no plan. It's hard for me to divorce the inaction of the government over the last 10 months with what I would do today. We would not be in this position today because last year I was asking for independence on everything from PPE to vaccine manufacturing. We should not be drawing away from poor countries, Mackenzie. We should be having the capacity here. We're a G7 country and we're trailing. Without vaccines, we can't get our economy going. People, Canadian families are worried. This is where the absence of leadership by Mr. Trudeau is most concerning.
We are here today, so it would be nice to know what the Leader of the Opposition thinks on a key thing like this. You've been discussing at length that the Canadian government needs to get more vaccines. This is an opportunity to get at least 1 million vaccines by March. The Prime Minister has said when he announced the COVAX plan that this was an opportunity for us to get more vaccines and was actually a part of Canada's plan. So again, would you accept these vaccines or not?
Well, Mackenzie, I want to see the contracts. I want to see what Mr. Trudeau has secured. He talks about the portfolio. He talks about we have more access to more doses than any other Canadians. We are failing right now. So, Mr. Trudeau, show us the plan for these doses you've promised, the multiple contracts. Why the lack of transparency? The very fact that you have to go to COVAX and draw away from a consortium that was intended for global balance with respect to immunizations shows there is no plan. So, Mackenzie, I would like that transparency first because Canada needs the vaccines to get back to work.
David?
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. David Thurton, CBC News. Good to see you.
Hi, David.
And yet Canada's being accused of, hoarding a lot of vaccines. How would you handle the need to vaccinate as many Canadians as possible, but also that humanitarian necessity to help out the world as well and to balance that? I'm just curious, how do you think Canada, as a middle power, should handle that, and other countries that are first out of the gate to buy all these vaccines? How would you handle that?
Canada should have made sure that we had a domestic supply that ensured we were vaccinated quickly so we could reopen the economy, get the economy moving together. And then, as Canada always does, David, we play our role helping other countries, helping the developed world. Right now, we have results that Mr. Trudeau are admitting are of a developing world level. That shows there is no plan and no leadership by the Liberal government. So I would like to see that capacity. I would like to see the vaccines rolled out here as quickly as possible. I want to see what the options are by having Mr. Trudeau release the contracts, show us what he's talking about when it comes to the portfolio, because we have to get the economy moving.
Let's talk about the parliamentary committee that you're proposing through your opposition day motion. I'm still unsure what you want to achieve. It sounds like it's an information gathering exercise, which is very valuable. As journalists, we like information. So is it just that, or do you think that you can achieve any concrete steps by this? And can you also touch on, what support you think you'll have from the other parties within Parliament?
Well, we're standing up for hundreds of thousands of jobs in Canada, families that depend on trade access with the United States, our closest ally, our closest trading partner. So I would hope the other parties join us in standing up for those working families, those unionized jobs in steel and aluminum that have suffered with tariffs. The lumber and the mills in British Columbia closed because of no softwood lumber agreement. The fact that we could coordinate on vaccines and PPE and critical supplies on a Canada-US basis. The fact that we have to make sure we have access and we're not blocked by Buy American. To recover our economy, to secure our future, having that trade access, that preferred relationship with the United States is key. So this committee will be specialized. It's an all hands on deck approach to focus in on the critical importance. And literally there's almost every sector of our economy impacted by the US relationship. So I hope the other parties join us in standing up for these families that depend on the Canada-US relationship.
Chris, do you have a question? Yes.
Thanks. Chris Reynolds, Canadian Press. Tomorrow, two of the senior executives from the streaming site Pornhub are appearing before the Ethics Committee, the Parliamentary Ethics Committee. I know that your party called for an investigation back in December of this company following allegations of sexual assaults, of child pornography, of human trafficking, all linked to this giant. I'm wondering if you were at the committee tomorrow yourself, what would you have to say to these, to the CEO and the COO?
Chris, I would say to them, how can we never have the most vulnerable exploited in a way like we heard from a witness this week, someone whose images when they were 13 were shared and she could not have them removed to the point that she contemplated taking her own life. This was a vulnerable person that actually tried to have a for-profit corporation stop the harm from occurring. And when that didn't happen, anyone who is a parent, I know would have been deeply upset by that situation. So there needs to be some accountability. We need to ensure that vulnerable people, that sexual assaults and violence towards women and children has a zero tolerance approach online. So the committee and the all-party work being done at it is a priority, and I hope the Trudeau government moves quickly on rules and liability in instances like we've seen.
On that point, would you have any more concrete suggestions for legal reform or for new regulations to try and regulate and enforce against some of the horrors and traumas that Pornhub is accused of, or would you just suggest we wait until the committee finishes its work and make suggestions to Parliament?
I think we should move as quickly as possible. The private sector has actually led a little bit here by restricting payment cycles and payment processing access to put pressure. But legislatures and Canada, our parliament, can actually put rules and attach liability in such egregious areas like the witnesses we've heard from already. It's horrendous to think that the most vulnerable had no voice, and that the exploitation of these images was being commoditized. It's horrific to think. So we need to move in tandem as quickly as possible.
And I'm told this is all the time we have. On m'indique que c'est tout le temps que nous avons. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. This concludes the press conference.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.